You know, the more that I learn about myself, the more I realize that I just do not fit the mold at all in terms of, who I am, and probably perhaps a lot of people, right? So you might be the same way once you start thinking about things and you start realizing who you are, where you came from, and you're like, wait a minute, I just don't fit the mold of what everybody else is doing and who they are. And it's super interesting. Um, we have this sort of notion that there is an average individual or that there is somebody out there that, or we represent many, many, many different people. And, we have this weird contrast where on one end, yes, we are human beings, and so we're really quite representative of every other human being that exists. Um, and that you could probably generalize pretty substantially from yourself to many, many millions of people. But that's only on one characteristic, on one particular trait, right? Or one thing. And if you start adding up all of the different combinations and start sort of dissecting you on, you start check mark boxes. Like if you had, for example, um, you had 10 different criteria on what it means to be a human being and, how that sort of looks, right? Like, so, your gender, for example, your, I don't know, the way that you talk, um, all of these are your hair color, all those kind of things. If you start looking at that, right, and you start dissecting, you have those 10 different characteristics, you'll find out that you do not fit a lot of what other people's stories are. In fact, you're probably pretty unique in that particular situation for who you are. So we have this sort of contrasting thing that is going on that I just love. And it's it's a bit of a puzzle, and I think scientifically we don't recognize this very well. Um, I don't think we do a good enough job of really suggesting that, we are very similar, but we're also very, very different. Um, and it's hard to know, it's hard to sort of make sense of those differences. You know, the reason why I'm reflecting on this, I start listening to other people's stories on, who they are, how they became somebody. And those stories are very often very similar. They're sort of similarly clustered together. And then I'm listening to my own story, right? Particular, how I became, a PhD or, how I am a professor or whatever, like all this sort of basic stories, how I came to be. Man, I am just so don't fit the mold, right? Like, um, I don't have parents that became professors at all or went into research path. They didn't finish high school. I come from middle of nowhere. I have, I found out later in life I have like ADHD, which is really very difficult to deal with if you're reading all the time. Um, and in fact, that was a thing that I struggled with my whole life was reading. Like all of these different characteristics that you would suggest that, hey, you're going to go into this. The only thing that I think you can maybe generalize and say you might go into this particular thing. I'm male. And I also grew up in a time that technology was a big thing, right? Like there was a real push towards it. It was kind of like a golden time. Um, but I didn't even know about that at the time, right? Like when I was going into it, I didn't even really think of that. I was just thinking about how do I, get a position at the mill where I grew up in this little dinky town and do okay in that particular mill, right? And I've kind of stumbled forward. And I think, like, for me, the sort of stumbling forward and kind of not knowing, but then kind of knowing right? Of making, hey, I could do this. I could stumble forward into something else. I could stumble forward into something else. So it's like you're presented a situation and then you think about, okay, we've got these several courses of action. What can I choose? I'm going to choose this particular best one. And that's often, that's a challenging thing to often do. There's lots of, typically the best one is not the easiest. The best one may have all sorts of baggage that's associated with it that you got to go through. And, doing that stuff kind of unlocks um, some barriers sometimes, but it's very challenging, right? So I have this, in my view, I have this view that I just want to learn things, and I don't even know where that came from because I was in special ed for many years, and this just learning things, maybe for me, I think I know what it is. I think it came from a deep rooted insecurity of, hey, if I can prove to other people that I am somehow smart or I'm somehow capable, then they'll like me. Because I was a lonely kid in high school, very lonely kid, and it sort of stuck with me. I literally did not have any friends in grade 9 and 10, and that really imprinted on me. Um, and it's funny. I mean, this is like 30 years, 20 years later, 25 years later, right? Like, and it still sticks with me. I just want to say, um, on two ends of the spectrum, that you're not that much different than anybody else. But then on the same token, man, everybody's story is very unique and different to them. And I think we need to sort of balance these things and be okay with both ends of those spectrums and really capture that, really be on top of it, really love who you are, given that there's these differences that you actually have.